Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Welcome to another 1/400 scale diecast model aircraft review of this Gemini Jets rendition of the Airbus A380 here in Lufthansa colors. The A380 is an aircraft that I don't feel warrants any more introduction than to say it is the civil jet of our generation. It is the largest civil jet ever produced. It is the largest successful airliner ever produced. It is the second largest successful aircraft, winged, fixed-wing aircraft that is, ever produced, second only to the Antonov 225, but that is a cargo variant, only no passengers on the 225. But in terms of everyday commercial flyers, what you might hope to fly on if you're trying to get the biggest thing possible, it is the A380 full stop. It is the largest wingspan, it's the longest, it's the heaviest, it has the highest passenger capacity, it's got some of the longest range in the airliner world as well. Long haul routes, flying over the oceans, between the continents. If you want a non-stop flight, odds are it's going to be on something like an A380. Not exclusively the A380, but chances are an A380 flies that route. Since 2005, the A380 has been in the skies. It's been in production since 2003. It remains in production as of June 2020, although the days of the Super Jumbos, the A380, the 747, they may well be numbered given the current climate around the world, particularly in the long-haul passenger aviation industry. However, the transient winds of change may well swing back the other way, and who knows? The Super Jumbos may be with us for quite some time yet, although at the moment their future does appear to be somewhat murky. But some of the biggest names in the airline industry fly A380s. Names like Emirates, Singapore Airlines, British Airways, Qantas, Air France, they're all flying A380s, and there is good reason for it. This is a tour de force in every department. It is the superlative generator in terms of specifications. It is the superlative generator in terms of engineering, and of course it's the superlative generator in saying it is the largest civil jet currently in service anywhere in the world. Let's take a closer look at the A380. We'll go over its technical specifications, we'll go over some of its history, we'll go over some of its Easter eggs as well in terms of historical oddities, and of course we will take a closer look at this wonderful 1/400 scale rendition of the A380 by Gemini Jets. Before we get into some of the more nitty-gritty details on the model and some more technical specs on the A380, first, of course, we must take a look at the Gemini Jets box, as is customary with many of these videos, both mine and others that I have seen around the web. Well, Gemini Jets, of course, in the upper left corner of this box definitely belies this model's true origins. Yes, there it is, a rendering of the A380 in Lufthansa colors front and center on that top panel of the box. Upper right, made for collectors by collectors, of course, and as trademarked. Bottom, toward the right side, of course, we've got Airbus A380 and then our registration, Delta Alpha India Mike Bravo, the Lufthansa logo, and then the Lufthansa title there. 1/400 scale die-cast model aircraft, as is readily evident there. And the bottom left corner is just blank. Obviously, the box has been done up in an imitation Lufthansa livery. That's to complement the livery design on the aircraft, as you can see there. And I've got to say, the rendering on the front panel of the box here, very nicely done. Bottom panel of the box now, there it is, Gemini Jets again, 1/400 scale die-cast model with all of the typical Gemini Jets selling points there. Top side panel of the box coming around this side. Barcode with your item number there for those of you keeping score at home. Adult collectible model, small parts. You can't have it if you're below 14 apparently, Gemini Jets. And then the back side, another rendering of the aircraft in a rather steep climb, Gemini Jets. New aircraft being added monthly, of course. The social media links for Gemini Jets and their corporate website, as real as it gets, and then more selling features for you if you needed to be persuaded to acquire this thing. Bottom, there it is, copyright 2019, Gemini Jets, Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, Lufthansa, officially licensed product. Made in China, and recycle the box if for some reason you want to throw it away. Inside the box, we have got our typical Gemini Jets flip-up panel, which reveals the void where the aircraft would be, and then of course we have got the little write-up that they always include on these boxes. Airbus A380, The Airbus A380 is a double-decker airliner manufactured by the European consortium Airbus SAS. First flown on 27 April 2005, the A380 was developed in response to the growing problems of airport congestion and air traffic control systems struggling to cope with the number of aircraft in operation. Dubbed as the Super Jumbo, the A380 replaced the 747 as the world's largest commercial airliner. Some airlines use the extra cabin space to offer such amenities as relaxation areas, bars, duty-free shops, and beauty shops. Despite its large size, the A380 adopts a conventional airliner design, having a fuselage slightly wider than that of the 747. Additionally, the overall footprint of the aircraft enables the A380 to be compatible with most existing ramps and runways at major airports. Yes, and a lot of that really had to be hashed out in the design phase of this aircraft, by the way, because the thing is so big and the wingspan so long. However, they still didn't quite have enough area on the wings as they were originally designed to generate the lift necessary, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Technical specifications on the A380 per the Gemini Jets box. It is obviously in the Lufthansa livery. The specific type of the aircraft is Airbus A380-841. Serial number is 41. That's where the 841 must come from. Registration Delta Alpha India Mike Bravo. The engines on this one are 4 Rolls-Royce Trent 970s. First flight of this particular airframe was January 22nd, 2010. It was delivered to Lufthansa on July 21st, 2010. So basically 6 months of prove out and fitting out before they delivered it. Max takeoff weight 1,234,600 pounds. Cruising speed 566 miles per hour. Range 9,196 miles. The range with max passenger capacity, in other words, every seat filled, 7,710 miles. And then here are some technicalities on the seating configurations on this particular aircraft. Schematic renderings now of the plane on this bottom flip-up panel. We have a side view and a top view of the aircraft here. Length 238 feet 7 inches. Height from the bottom of the gear to the top of the tail 79 feet 1 inch. And then the wingspan 261 feet 8 inches. Yes, that is an incredibly large footprint for a civil jet, yet there it is on the absolutely enormous Airbus A380. And there it is there, looking all nice and pretty. Let's talk about this thing in somewhat more detail and take some closer looks at the model. The story of the A380 really goes back to the late 1960s when the aviation market was really expanding in the civil realm and the jet age had well and truly solidified itself. Boeing stole the show for about 35 years with the advent of the 747. It was the world's largest civil jet, the world's largest commercial airliner at the time. It had some of the longest range of any civil jet as well. It was very versatile in both passenger and cargo service, so it really was the monopoly. If you needed a big civil jet, it was going to be a 747. Of course, Europe and Airbus and the multinational consortium that Airbus is, they were outdone by this and they wanted to put this right. So in about 1988, Airbus put together a group to work on a design for, at that point, a hypothetical ultra-high capacity airliner. And there were a number of design studies that were undertaken by all the major aviation manufacturers around this time, trying to figure out, could we make something bigger than the 747, because Boeing did it in the 60s and it turned into a great success. Was there room for improvement on a very high capacity super jumbo civil jet? There were alternate proposals from Boeing and alternate production examples from Boeing with continued developments on the 747 series, which we continue to see through today. Also, McDonnell Douglas, they put together a design study which was eventually called the MD-12, which certain artist concepts of look suspiciously similar to the Airbus A380 in terms of how we eventually came to see the A380, but by 1988 Airbus had started to work on this ultra-high capacity airliner concept, and ultimately that is what evolved into the A380. The A380 eventually made its first flight on April 27, 2005, and it would enter into civil service first with Singapore Airlines on the 25th of October 2007. The aircraft is currently in production. They have been building these things since 2003, and they continue to build these through the present day. At this time, though, given the recent carnage which has overtaken the aviation sector of industry, there are currently plans to end production of the A380. It's a little bit nebulous right now in terms of when exactly that production will end. There are still unfilled orders that have been placed. However, production is most likely to wrap down to zero or near zero by about 2022, 2023, around there. But again, this is a moving target right now. What's happening currently, though, is the major operators of the A380, this includes airlines such as Emirates, Singapore Airlines, British Airways, Qantas, Air France, they're all talking about retiring their A380s, and some already have. Air France, I believe, has retired all of their A380s at the time of recording this. Now, that may change. Again, this is a moving target due to a very fluid situation around the world right now, particularly in the airline industry, which is so dependent on other industries and other industrial sectors being up and running. And many things around the world are not up and running right now. So the demand for travel, particularly long-haul, long-range commercial passenger travel, really has not been there. The cargo sector is still doing okay, but it's the passenger sector where things are really hurting. And the A380 is a passenger jet exclusively. There are no freight variants of the A380 as of the time of this recording. So major airline operators are basically saying, this thing's too big for us. Is this a sign of things to come? We shall see. Moving away from some of the wild speculation, doom and gloom for a moment, though, some more detailed technical specifications on the Airbus A380. The variant as we see it here is the A380-800, and I do believe that is the only variant of the A380 that is currently out there, and at this point maybe the only variant ever produced of the A380. Despite the tremendous size and tremendous complexity of an aircraft such as this, it only requires a crew of 2 to operate. 2 seats in the cockpit, you've got a pilot and you've got a first officer. Seating configurations can vary wildly on an aircraft of this size, but generally speaking, we see 575 passenger seats on board, but we do have a theoretical maximum of 853 passenger seats available in the floor plans of the A380. The exit limit on the airframe is 868, and that's combining the upper and lower decks. This aircraft also the only civil jet to have 2 full-length decks running through the full length of the fuselage. 538 seats theoretically on the lower deck, 330 seats theoretically on the upper deck. That's combining to create the 868 limit there on the exit. Cargo volume on the aircraft, 6,190 cubic feet. Overall length of the aircraft, 238 feet 7 inches, the wingspan 261 feet 8 inches, the height from the ground to the top of the vertical stabilizer 79 feet exactly, the fuselage width 23 feet 5 inches, the overall fuselage height 27 feet 7 inches, and that gives the overall fuselage a slight egg shape that you may be able to see, particularly looking nose on from the aircraft here. Overall length of the cabin, now this is the internal volume of the pressurized area inside the fuselage, in other words the habitable area, 163 feet 9 inches on the main deck. That's compressed a little bit to 147 feet 5 inches on the upper deck. Overall wing area is 9,100 square feet. Think about that in the context of a house floor plan. 9,100 square feet. Your typical suburban American house is between 1,000 and 3,000 square feet. So this is the size of at least 3 relatively big houses. To put that into context for a second, that's the wing area. The overall aspect ratio is 7.53 on those wings, and the wings are swept back at 33.5 degrees. Maximum takeoff weight on the A380 is 1,268,000 pounds. The operating empty weight, 611,000 pounds. Max payload weight, 185,000 pounds. Fuel capacity in this thing, 559,937 pounds, which works out to be about 85,472 U.S. gallons, or 323,546 liters. Powering the A380, we have 2 choices of engine. We have either the GP 7200 series of gas turbine jet engine, or we have the Rolls-Royce Trent 900 engines. those GP7200 engines, they are actually built by a consortium that is composed of two different companies. We have General Electric and Pratt & Whitney out of Canada. So GE out of the United States, Pratt & Whitney out of Canada producing the GP7000 engines there. Or, of course, we do have the Rolls-Royce Trent 900s, of course, Rolls-Royce being a publicly owned company in the United Kingdom. Overall thrust produced by those engines, maximum could be 80,210 pound-feet at sea level. That's 356.81 kilonewtons at sea level. The cruise speed on the aircraft, 0.85 Mach. That works out to be 903 kilometers per hour. The maximum operational speed of the aircraft is 0.89 Mach. That's 945 kilometers per hour. Typical landing speeds, assuming that we're carrying a typical payload, 256 kilometers per hour, 138 knots, which, when you consider the size of this aircraft, is actually very slow, all things considered. The takeoff length required here, minimum under typical loading, 9,800 feet of runway, or 3,000 meters of runway. So that, again, is also pretty remarkable considering how big this aircraft is. I mean, we have a wingspan of 262 feet, basically. This is a big vehicle, and yes, 9,800 feet of runway, that's pretty long length, but still, the thing fully loaded can weigh over 1,000,000 pounds. That's pretty remarkable. Overall service range on this aircraft is 8,000 nautical miles. That's 14,800 kilometers. Service ceiling, in other words, the maximum altitude while this thing is flying with passengers aboard, 43,000 feet. Very, very interesting specifications on this aircraft. On one hand, it's extremely large. It is the largest civil jet that has ever been built. Is the largest aircraft currently in commercial passenger service. The Antonov 225 is the only aircraft that's larger than this, but that is not a passenger aircraft, and it never has been. That's a cargo-only special, originally built to carry the Soviet version of the space shuttle. But as far as the mere mortal is concerned, yes, this is the biggest thing that you're ever going to see in the skies, and it's the biggest thing that you could ever hope to fly on. It's pretty awe-inspiring, even just looking at the specs. As this Gemini Jets rendition of the A380 continues to rotate before us, let's just take a look at some of the more macrocosmic details at full scale here of this aircraft and this wonderful rendition of it by Gemini Jets. First of all, the first thing to me that meets the eye of this model is just how nicely put together everything is. Unlike some other models of smaller type aircraft, you don't get some of the more finicky, nuanced faults, perhaps, in terms of assembly faults that you get on the smaller ones. This is quite a large model. It is about 9 inches long. It's pretty big. It's the largest aircraft in the world, basically, and therefore it would be a pretty big 1/400 scale model, which, of course, it is. It's a weighty thing. The fuselage is all metal. The wings are metal. The empennage is metal. The only plastic parts on it are the engines and the landing gear. And the landing gear aren't even entirely plastic. They do have rubber tires on them. So it's upwards of 95% metal in terms of the model construction. It weighs quite a bit. I have not weighed the thing, but I'd say it probably weighs about 10 to 12 ounces. It's pretty dense. So that's the first thing that strikes you when you look at it. Visually, what strikes me about it is, again, Gemini Jets doing great work on the paint and on the graphics here on the fuselage and elsewhere. As things spin around here, you can start to pick up on more details on the fuselage there. You can see all of the windows that are printed on. No waterslide decals anywhere on this model, and pretty much on no other model aircraft that I have seen so far, at least not in diecast. But everything looks crisp and clean and proper. Everything looks like it's in the right place. Nothing appears to be crooked. There are no smears or smudges, no application faults in that printing that I can pick up on. All of the other smaller details here in terms of where the doors are, both the passenger entrances and exits as well as cargo doors, they all look to be complete and correct. Everything is in the proper locations and proper orientations. Cockpit going by there. The cockpit windows look straight and level. They look to be in the right place there. in relation to other graphics on the fuselage. So really, I can't fault this thing in terms of its assembly or in its detailing. Across the top side of the fuselage, you can also see some of the antenna work that's been done. We have got 3 antennas running across the top side of the fuselage. We also have the dome antenna above, roughly 3/4 of the way toward the aft section of the aircraft. That is for your satellite phone and internet connectivity, things like that. That's also been applied very nicely and looks straight and level with no chips in that paint or anything there, no glue lines or anything visible. So really, it all looks good. Looking at the wings, they're all straight and sharp. Everything looks good from the wing root, attaching the wings into the fuselage there. They are attached directly into the fuselage. It's not a cradle arrangement like on some other planes, and all the way out to the wing tips. Everything looks good. It looks scale correct. Everything is straight, nicely finished. Absolutely wonderful inside and out in terms of all the details that you can see on this aircraft. Looks absolutely wonderful. If we bring the rotation to a stop here, we can start to zoom in a little bit more and take some closer looks at smaller details on this aircraft. Starting with the nose. Now, I know that I'm probably going to be chastised for saying this, but there has been a bit of a polemic, a little bit of a controversy that's been stirred up regarding the A380 by Gemini. People are saying the nose shape doesn't at all look accurate and that sort of thing. And well, I can definitely empathize with that viewpoint. There is a bit of a bump here in the nose just below the cockpit windows, and on the prototype, on the real aircraft, that is kind of evident and kind of not, depending on which angles you're looking at it from. Personally, I would be of the camp to say that perhaps Gemini have gotten this a little bit wrong, particularly when you do look at actual photos of the A380, you don't see nearly as much of a bump structure below those cockpit windows. I mean, you do see one there, there's no question about it, but is it as pronounced as we see on the Gemini Jets version of the Gemini Jets mold, rather? Again, it is a matter of perspective. Personally, I think that the cockpit windows really should be sitting a little bit further forward and a little bit more level with the nose cone area. But is it really a deal breaker? Not in my opinion. There is a bump there, but I think the scaling is a little bit off in terms of the contours of the lines here. But be that as it may, everything else about this does look 100% complete and correct as far as I'm concerned, if we can recover our focus here. There we go. Moving slightly aft here, of course, we have got the cockpit windows. You can see that we have got windshield wipers in this section as well. Below that, we have our Lufthansa logo, as well as some static ports, air data ports, pitot tubes, things like that. Additionally, you can see printed on the lower side of the nose, we have got the landing gear doors, the closed landing gear doors. They would open up, of course, as the landing gear were extending or retracting, just to allow that wheel and tire assembly to clear the fuselage, and then it closes up again to make things a little bit more streamlined, with the lower half of the doors remaining open, as we can see there. We've got ourselves our main entry and exit door here on the left side of the fuselage. Very nice. And then, of course, we have got Airbus A380-800, and then we also have the name of this particular aircraft, that is München, that is German for Munich. Yes. Moving rears, you have got our Lufthansa main titles here on the aircraft. Moving rearward, you can see the lower deck starts off a little bit farther forward than the upper deck. Of course, there would be a stairwell in this area to allow access to the upper deck. But you've got 2 rows of windows visible there. Some of them are blanked off with the window shades presumably closed, but everything looks very nice through this section. And then as we continue to pan aft, there's the wing root and joining up with the fuselage there, and you can see how the wings are actually stuck into the fuselage. No cradle arrangements here. And as we start to move more aft and more outboard, you can start to see some of the details on the engines here on the aircraft's left wing. Inside the engines, of course, you can see that we have got some very nice fan blade details there in the initial outer stage of the engine. Behind that, of course, would be the compressor stages of the engine. A lot of bypass flow, though, going through these first stage of turbine blades here. And again, most of the thrust that the engines are producing nowadays actually does come from bypass flow rather than the direct compressor stage combustion exhaust out the back there. They're using Bernoulli's principle. They are energizing a flow through its core structure, in other words, the inner section of the flow, which is comprised primarily of the exhaust products from the combustion in the engine, and then the air through its cohesive properties, it's energized in the outer bypass flow to create more volume of air that's passing through the engine. So it's not like a turbojet where it is just straight through, you burn it and then you shoot it out. No, we are getting some of Bernoulli's principle and a little bit of Coanda effect as well, getting that airflow energized all around the inner surface of the engine, and of course primarily through the intake side of the engine there. All that volume is being energized. Some of it is being combusted, but the majority of it is actually just passing through in that bypass flow, creating more efficiency and more thrust. Leading edge of the wing now, you can see the leading edge slats there. The shut lines between the panels have been rendered quite nicely, and then as we move outboard to the wing tip, you can see we've got the red strobe here on the left wing. Of course, we've got a green one on the right wing, and then we have got our wing end fence visible right here. The end fence on these wings, it is something that is a little bit of an anecdote about the design of this aircraft. When they were going through the initial design phase, drawing this up and doing the math, trying to figure out, okay, what sort of wing area, what sort of wing span do we need to create lift enough to lift 1.2 million pounds fully loaded? Ultimately, they came up with a number that would have exceeded the design limits in terms of getting this aircraft into most airports. So, what did they do with this? Much like we've seen on other aircraft, not necessarily only Airbus aircraft either, but basically all types of aircraft now, the design trend has been to put these little end fences or winglets on the wing tips, and there's a twofold reason for this. One, you can make the wings more aerodynamically efficient in terms of their generation of drag by including these end fences here, and it's also something, funnily enough, that we have also seen in automotive design, and particularly in race car design, where you have end fences along wings that are fitted onto race cars, because it makes those wings more efficient too. And the reason why it makes those wings more efficient is it limits wingtip vortices. When any wing surface passes through an airstream, yes, obviously, you have faster moving air moving over the top of the wing, and you have lower or slower moving air moving underneath the wing. The faster the air goes relative to an adjacent surface, the lower pressure it exerts, dynamically and statically, which means that you generate lift across the surface of a wing. This creates a suction basically on the top of the wing, which pulls the wing upward. However, the byproduct of that is you have two very different states of flow on opposing sides of the wing. You've got high speed, low pressure up top, and you have lower speed, high pressure on the bottom. When the wing structure runs its course, they converge just beyond the wingtip. And when this happens, you have a spiral which starts to form, and then it just continues to churn up more and more air as it expands out into the atmosphere. Not only does that create a lot of turbulence and a lot of drag, but it also limits the effective area in which a wing is actually operating efficiently. Let's say you've got a wingtip here that just terminates. You're going to be generating a vortice or vortices and a vortex singular, and you're going to be having all of this turbulent interference flow around the wingtip. So effectively, the gray section of wing, at least on the leading edge, is the only thing generating lift, and the rest of the wing surface is basically useless. However, when you've got one of these end fences here on an aircraft wing or in an automotive application, you basically interrupt that flow that starts the vortex forming, and what you get is you get more effective surface area of the wing actually able to generate that lift. It's more aerodynamically efficient, so you're not going to create as big of a vortex here, which means less drag, but you're also going to get more bang for your buck in terms of getting more utilization aerodynamically of that wing. So, going through that design process for Airbus, just the addition of these end fences on either one of the main wings made their wings efficient enough to generate sufficient lift so that they could keep the wings within the limits of the law in terms of getting this aircraft into most big international hubs, meaning that the rest of the world could stay just the same and the A380 would be ready and open for business. Very cool little anecdote that I learned in my researching this video. Very cool. Taking a look at the starboard side of A380, let's zoom in here and take a look at the nose. We took a look at the port side of the nose, but starboard side slightly different, of course. We still do have an entry-exit door along the nose, as you can see there. We also have the Lufthansa logo, as well as some air data ports here. But we have a big cargo door here in the lower portion of the forward section of fuselage that we did not have on the port side. And of course, this is for loading big pieces of cargo or other things into the lower deck cargo hold there. That's below the lowest passenger deck on the A380. So in effect, you can think of this as a triple deck airliner, 2 decks to be occupied by humans at any one time. But nice cargo door detail as well, very nice. And of course, you've got the right-hand side of our nose landing gear. Up at the top of the screen, you can see the forward-most of our antennas there. Very cool. And then, of course, more window detail, more auxiliary door detail, the upper deck door coming into view, as well as the wing root where it has loaded up into the fuselage. Engines inboard and outboard now on the right-hand wing. You can see more details on the sides of the engines where we've got ourselves some ground crew infrastructure here for interfacing with the engines. They can hook up external air lines there for starting the engines without bleed air from the auxiliary power unit. Also more service ports for the engines as well, checking oil levels and things like that. Of course, you can also see some exhaust side detailing of the engines, which we'll get a better look at a little bit later on. Moving up from the engines, you can see here that we have got our pylons to which the engines are mounted. These are done in, I believe, plastic. And the engine nacelles as well are in plastic, but the wing structure itself is metal. Very nice. You can also see some more detail of those leading edge slats there. Very, very nicely done. And of course, moving outboard, we've got ourselves our wingtip yet again, as you can see here. If we'll focus on it, or do we have to pull out a little? We've got to pull out a little bit, but you'll also be able to see that we have got ourselves a green strobe here on the right wingtip there. Very nice. And of course, our end fence detail that I went on for about 5 minutes about. Perhaps that was a little excessive of me. Oh well. Moving back inboard toward the aircraft, you can now see that we have got our main landing gear plainly visible here. All of the gear on this aircraft, they roll, as well as the main gear, they all pivot. So that's also a very nice detail as well. You also get that on Gemini models of the 747, 777, I believe, and I think you also get it on the 757, 767, but I'll have to double check that. Moving aft as well, you can see more passenger entry and exit doors for the upper and lower decks, service door there at the aftmost section in the blue area of the fuselage. 2 more cargo doors down here, I believe, or is it just one more? But yes, this cargo door right here that I'm talking about. That's plainly visible, and then moving toward the rear in the empennage section of the aircraft. Very nicely rendered. Moving up, you can see that we have got our vertical stabilizer with the Lufthansa bird. Obviously, this is the newer Lufthansa livery. No more yellow bird, but I like it just as much. And then we have got our shut line here for the rudder, plainly evident there. That is the bright section that's reflecting the light just there. You can see that looks very, very good. And your horizontal stabilizers there. Great detail there as well. Can't quite see it from this angle, but we've also got shut lines there for the elevator control surfaces back there. You can see it a little bit on the left-hand winglet there, but bleeding edge profile here. Very sharp, very nice, and a nice sharp point there at the tip of that wing. Very nicely done. Top of the tail looks good in terms of the overall geometries, as does the leading edge of that. Looks good. Terminates in a nice sharp point. And then, of course, the rear side where the rudder is, that also looks very nice. Very, very, very cool. Nicely done, Gemini. Now, coming in and take a closer look at the nose of the A380. There we go. We'll pull into it a little bit more, and we will drop the camera down ever so slightly. There it is, from pretty much nose on. Looks good there. The little bump that we talked about earlier, not really evident from here. Got our cockpit windows nicely rendered there. The 3 little dots just below the cockpit windows, I'm still not 100% sure on what they are. I'm going to call them de-icing things, probably misters like you get on a car windshield. But looks good. You can see the nose landing gear there sitting very straight and level, looks very good. And then, of course, as we shift our depth of field rearward, you can see the main landing gear come into focus now. This aircraft sits very nicely on its gear. It looks like it is sitting pretty much straight and level on all counts. So yes, very, very, very nice. Definitely liking what I'm seeing here. Leading edges of the wings, we can see a little bit more detail on those now. Very cool. You can see the wing root there. That's carrying the structure of the outboard main gear. And then as we move toward the outboard side, you can start to see how the wing is really very steeply raked upward there. Again, generating more lift, more clean airflow. And then we have got ourselves our engines inboard and outboard here on aircraft left. Looks very good. You can see the fan blade detail inside there. Looks awesome. Looks absolutely awesome. You can even see that there is a little attempt at the, not necessarily a spiral pattern there on the cone structure of the main fan section of the engine, but perhaps that little displaced dot that you can see, just to give somebody a really quick visual reference to see whether or not the engine is running while it's sitting there on the ground. Very cool. And I also think that those oscillations in terms of the visual patterning that's created when the engines are running, I think they also have something to do with deterring bird strikes. I do believe that they have an effect in terms of making birds steer clear, but I don't know. I'd have to do a little bit more research on that. But looks good. Leading edge profile of the left wing, very nicely done. And of course, that's all mirrored here on the right wing. Again, our right-hand engines inboard and outboard. That also looks absolutely great. And then toward the wingtip with our little end fence there, and that section looks very, very nice. And again, pretty much complete and correct. I don't really have too many qualms about this. Moving up, we can get a better look at our empennage area from the front. And you can see the overall displacement and disposition of everything. Looks good. Looks very good indeed. Having to play with the focus a little bit to try and make this work. But looks good. Everything looks straight. Vertical stabilizer looks straight. Horizontal stabilizers look straight. I have absolutely nothing to complain about in terms of the build quality on this. This is a very nice one, I will say. Probably one of the nicer ones that Gemini Jets have put out recently. Rear view now on the A380. Let's come in a little bit closer to the center line and see what's going on here. Of course, we have got the tail cone of the aircraft visible here that terminates here in a pretty sharp point with the auxiliary power unit exhaust right in that section. That looks good. And some reasonable attempts at detail there in that section. Unlike on the 747-8, there is no separate pipe, obviously, evident in there in terms of actually putting that separate element into the fuselage, but the end cap there on the end of the fuselage looks reasonably convincing enough, and clearly you can see where an exhaust is sort of implied as being in the center there for your auxiliary power unit, but that looks nice. Overall geometries of the tail cone, though, coming up from underneath the horizontal stabilizer, that all looks good and correct. Looks very nice. You can see some service doors here for the auxiliary power unit, presumably. That looks good. And then, of course, the trailing edges of our elevators here. You can see the shut lines there that are denoting the wing structure from the movable flap area on the elevators. That looks good. Very, very nice. Moving more toward the center line of the aircraft, zooming toward the middle anyway, you can see where we have got ourselves some wing areas here, where we've got our shut lines for the flaps and spoilers here, so our trailing edge flaps and our spoilers here, both for attitude control as well as for the speed brakes. That looks good. Of course, we've got our landing gear here from the rear, our main gear, and you can see we do ever so slightly have a slight amount of roll dialed in on the ground, but I mean, it is very, very slight. I can't even really make it do anything. We've got ourselves, again, as I said, it sits very much straight and level. Looks very, very good. Again, I'm getting very, very nitpicky talking about that very slight bit of roll momentum in the thing on the ground. It looks good. Looks absolutely fine. Don't mind me. I'm just sort of geeking out about this now. Taking a look at the engines on the exhaust side, that looks good. You can see that there are separate parts there, separate elements inside the engines there, just trying to give a little bit more detail. That looks good. And also moving toward the right wing, you can see very similar details there, which of course makes perfect sense because you would have 4 identical engines on the same aircraft. That looks good. and I'm not entirely sure if it's a trick of the light or if it's actually there. No, it must be a trick of the light. I was going to say that, is there a slight chance that the engines are almost see-through here? Take a look at the outboard engine here. Can you almost kind of see something that looks like fan blades toward the top section of that engine right there? I don't know. It could be a trick of the light. Could be a hallucination at this point. I'm not sure. But it looks good nonetheless. And of course, that's a detail that's far too small to see with the naked eye anyway. The camera's magnification really does play a big part in appreciating these models, for me at least. But that looks good. And lastly, a look at the port side of the aircraft. We basically saw this before, but just to do it formally, there's the nose that we did take a close look at earlier, and you can see the name of the aircraft there, as well as Airbus A380-800, plainly visible. Yep, looks good. There's the nose with the little bump below the cockpit windows. And then, of course, as we start to pan over to the right, you can see more details macrocosmically. Very nice. Very, very nice. Again, empennage area moving upward. Looks good. Looks very good. Very, very pleased with this one. This is definitely one of the nicer ones that I have, and I think consequently it's one of the nicer ones that Gemini Jets have made, because it really does look very, very appropriate. And again, I don't really have anything to complain about with regard to this model. It looks absolutely splendid. No problems at all with this. And now finally, just to close this out with some handheld shots, we can get a little bit closer to some of the finer details here. There's the nose section again. There is Airbus A380-800 and then München, name of the aircraft. Looks very, very good. Star Alliance logo, Lufthansa logo, Lufthansa title graphics there. And then really top side is what the handheld shots are good for. You can see more details up top. There is our forwardmost antenna. Very cool. Strobes, I believe. The red rotating beacons there for location lights there. Second antenna. There is our Wi-Fi satellite phone antenna. And then our rearmost topside antenna with our empennage there. I love the paint here as well. I think this is also something that the new Lufthansa livery does very nicely. There's a great depth to that blue section. There's not a lot of blue on this aircraft, but the blue that is there looks really, really nice. And again, I do appreciate that, particularly on a model like this. I do like myself some nicely applied paint, and that is definitely the case with this one. There is our registration on the aircraft. It's in a somewhat odd place as far as registration on airliners. Sometimes you would see it along the nose. Most often, though, you see it near the tail or even on the vertical stabilizer. But here, it's down here in the lower section below the lower deck there. There it is. Delta Alpha India Mike Bravo, the flag of Germany. Very cool. Very, very cool. Definitely liking what I'm seeing here. Along the tail cone here a little bit more closely, we can see what's going on. You can also see the shut lines there for the elevators on the horizontal stabilizers. Nice APU exhaust you can see there. Then moving toward the wingtips and the wings themselves. There's the detail on the wings. Leading edge slats. The engine nacelles, you can see the little winglets, little fins that are on the inboard sides of the engine nacelles. They look good. Very nice. Wing roots, where they're joined up there. Very good. Very, very good indeed. We'll get a little bit closer into the fan blades there. That looks nice. I do like that. I like that on the 747s that I have as well, but it looks equally as good on the A380. Very nicely put together by Gemini. I really do like those details. And generally, I am an engine guy before anything else. I like airplanes, I like cars, but really the commonality between all of those things is they've got engines, and anything that burns things to make power is interesting to me. So I really do like the engine details on these models. It looks absolutely wonderful. Really, I can't say that I have too many complaints about anything that we have there. And one other small Easter egg that some of you may not have known about, and was only brought to my attention by a longtime friend of the channel recently in reaction to the review I did of the 747-8i, which also happened to be in Lufthansa colors. I did not know this, but Lufthansa actually gets its name from an old confederation of merchants called the Hansas. It was called the Hanseatic League, and they were big from about the mid-1100s all the way to the mid-1400s in north-central Europe. So the areas that now comprise parts of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, northern Poland, and even into southern Sweden. They controlled a lot of territory, and they were basically a bunch of Baltic maritime traders for the most part. They were very popular and very powerful, and they had a lot of territory, obviously. They had a lot of financial interest, a lot of trade interest. They controlled the trade routes through the Baltic Sea, and yes, they were so influential in the society that eventually became what we came to know today as Germany, that their name lives on in the airline Lufthansa, which literally means Hansa Air, Luft being German for air. So there it is, a little Easter egg, a little connection back to the days before the Renaissance on the side of an airliner, no less. Never thought that it'd be possible that somebody who might recognize their name, if you could bring them back from the dead, basically, from the 1100s, somebody from the 1100s might look at an aircraft and see their name on it. I had no idea of that connection, but there it is. A little bit of medieval history living on in the form of an airline. Very, very cool to see that. So, there it was, the Airbus A380-800, rendered in 1/400 scale by Gemini Jets. As I said throughout this whole thing, I think this is one of the best models that Gemini Jets have put out recently, and I know that there have been some people who have been a little bit critical of this one, saying that the shape of the nose is wrong, and objectively, and given what I presented to you earlier, I think that, yes, that's correct. The shape of the nose is wrong on this, although I have to say it is very slight. Again, that bump that's just forward of the bottom of the cockpit windows, I think that needs to be a little bit closer to the bottom of the cockpit windows, if that makes any sense at all. But aside from that, I can find absolutely nothing to fault on this. The assembly is fantastic. All the shut lines where the different panels come together, particularly where the wings join up into the fuselage, both the main wings and the horizontal stabilizer, looks absolutely fine. No issues with that. The paint and the printing looks absolutely glorious. Nothing is smudged or streaked or chipped or anything. It looks absolutely wonderful. The landing gear are great. They all roll nicely. The main gear pivots as well, so you get the aircraft able to be displayed in a nose-up attitude on the ground if you want to arrange it that way somehow with external supports or whatever arrangements you have. It's able to do that, and it looks realistic while doing so. The antennas topside across the top of the fuselage, they're good. They're straight. They're not loose. They don't move around. Nothing looks out of place in that regard either. So really, again, this has got to be a 10 out of 10 for me. It's a fantastic aircraft in reality, and it's a fantastic 1/400 scale model as well. Again, I don't think that there's really anything about this that would tell me, no, I don't want another one. And I do have other A380s by Gemini Jets, as well as one by another manufacturer, and they're all fantastic. The A380, in reality, is a wonderful aircraft. It is such a testament to what humanity can do when they want to solve an engineering problem, because it's the largest civil jet ever produced. It's the largest thing that's flying through our skies on a regular basis, and it works so wonderfully well. You have two different engine types that you can put on this aircraft by three different manufacturers. They all work well. Rolls-Royce had some problems early on, but they got solved. And now here it is. It's the largest aircraft flying today with any regularity. If you want to find any flying machine larger than this, you leave the realm of fixed wing and you go into the realm of dirigibles. Yes, that's how large this thing is. It is the Airbus A380 in 1/400 scale by Gemini Jets, and if you don't have either this particular one in Lufthansa colors or you're considering adding an A380 of any sort to your collection, it's a wonderful aircraft to have in your 1/400 scale collection. Definitely, I would highly recommend the Gemini Jets rendition thereof. That's all I've got for you today, though. I do hope sincerely that you've enjoyed this one. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.